So this is an agger. Um, there are many different images of aggers. Aggers are actually on the cover of the Master's Tale book as well as the bad guy. So what aggers do is aggers are a semi-subterranean species of lizard that existed for a long time. The two side mouths breathe either poisonous or flammable gas, and then the main mouth ignites that gas. They tend to have long poisonous tails as well. They have 6 legs, so they can stand on 4 legs and strike with their front legs, as well as stand up like a centaur. They are mean, horrible, ornery little creatures. I say little, as compared to dragons, right? They're about 17 feet long. So longer crocodiles could get to the size of an agger, right? They probably are just barely big enough to ride, maybe. Um,
Mm.
so the the thing that I love about aggers is they're just inherently dangerous. I mean, you see the poisonous stinger, the claws, the rows of serrated teeth. They have multiple mouths. They're just really off-putting. However, there were some aggers that were good and made friends with the sentient races. And when an event called the Sundering happened, where most of the pre Sundering races were destroyed, there was a great war in which some of the races used demonic power that came back to haunt the world and ultimately destroyed much of the pre Sundering races. This would be before humans, modern elves, most of the dwarves, that type of thing. And the Sundering broke open the earth and released a great amount of power. And when it did, many of the good aggers were chosen to be enhanced by this power, and they became dragons. So, what does that mean? They were transformed, grew much larger, gained elemental power, lost many of their more violent, poisonous, or sulfuric methods of attack in exchange for breath weapons. Some of these dragons are very, very large. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up, say, an image of a Bamarak, one of the larger dragons.
Well, from a biological standpoint, they wouldn't need the poison spines in their tail or any of the explosive breath weapon type gas, mainly because they wouldn't be down in the tunnels anymore. They would also be much larger, so they wouldn't be along the same food chain. They wouldn't have to deal with the same kind of prey and predator threat.
Right. So you can see that kind of small, shadowy image. That's actually a dwarf talking to this dragon. Of course, in my logo, you can see an orc standing before a dragon. So if you're thinking, oh, well, and this would be a larger dragon, a larger one of the main continent dragons. So if you're looking at it and, oh, aggers are maybe 17 feet long, I mean, this thing's head and neck are over 17 feet long. I mean, they can get gigantic, up to well over 100 feet in length. So they're also generally immune to their elements. So dragons from the base continent have 5 different elements: fire, water, wind, um, lightning, and ice. And these are the light elements in the game. They just interact in a certain way as opposed to the heavy elements. So each one of the dragons receives one of these. There are mixed dragons. We'll get to that later on. But when designing dragons, what we did, as far as their history is concerned, is we had the dragons become great forces of power, right? They were meant to balance the world. When the sentient races, elves, humans, Vesuvians, Erakai, etc., would get out of line, the dragons were to come down on them. They were also had a great fear of the demonic, right? Because the fires of Ire had destroyed the world, and so they viewed themselves as battling evil. So dragons, in a weird way, are actually like kind of chaotic good. It's just they're wary of all the other races. So it's like, oh, these dwarves are messing around the mountain, blowing stuff up with dynamite. We're gonna go mess them up, right? And so dragons come into conflict with the dwarves pretty early on, and you have them destroy one of the dwarven um, main cities. So something to understand about the dwarves just to backtrack there, is that the dwarves were taught to refine metal by the ore elves, and the greatest of the ore elves were gold ore elves. So the dwarves value gold, right? Because they've been taught metallurgy by these elves that were kind of gold in appearance, right? So they considered gold next to godliness. They also used gold as money. And so when Abimelech conquered the dwarves, he took all their gold and sat on it as a throne, right? So you get that kind of motif of the dragon with a stockpile of gold, but instead of a dragon stockpiling gold just to stockpile gold, which is inherently kind of silly, right? It's a dragon stockpiling gold because it represents power and holiness and goodness to the dwarves. And so this dragon's going, hey, don't cross me. I can take your entire culture away. The dwarves came back with the nine, which were nine great heroes that were able to fight off Abimelech. And since from that point forward, dwarves and dragons were basically at war, right? The dwarves would take over, dragons' keeps. The dragons would then take the keeps back. They would take the gold from the dwarves, so on and so forth. And this went for a long time until Banglabear. Banglabear, it might be my single favorite character in Master's Tale. He is
He's a fan favorite, that's for sure.
right. So Banglabear is an idiot. He is what they call the dwarfiest of all dwarves. It says if there was drink, he drank it. If there was a dance, he danced it. And if there were women, he womened them, and he womened them good. So Banglabear was the son of a rich banker who would have these lavish parties that ended up almost turning into riots as they would break out into the dwarven streets. Well, he got taken to task for this, and when he turned to his father to bail him out of jail, his father denied it. And so Banglabear had a massive debt over his head. And there were people that were coming to kill him to pay this debt. So Banglabear gets thrown in prison, and his friends joke, well, your father owns a bank, right? Well, if you could get a dragon to deposit their hoard in the bank, then the interest would cover all the problems that you have. They say this as a joke. Banglabear takes it literally. He goes to the dragon and he begins to explain compound interest. And by the end of the discussion, the dragon has agreed to deposit his gold in a dwarven bank. So, funny story. He cheats death by doing something so incredibly stupid it had to work. What ends up happening is this alliance forms between the dwarves and the dragons, where the dragons, instead of hoarding gold, give over their gold to dwarven banks. And in the same way, those dwarves can call on the dragons to then defend that gold. The dwarves also help the dragon defend their young, which is what we talked about, which is more important to some dragons, right? They provide a safe place for them to keep their young while the dragons are out. So the dwarves develop these banks. These banks show up in all of the great nations. Gold becomes the currency throughout the world because, of course, the dwarves use the gold as currency. And whoever controls these banks controls a dragon associated with that bank. So dragons begin to balance the world's power because, let's say, the humans have a bank in the city of Pendragon. Okay, and that has a dragon associated in it. And that dragon is young and weak. Well, then you might have a dwarven city with an older dragon like Tobamarok who shows up and might beat Nylarak to death or something like that. So that dwarven bank has more power. And so these banks form up throughout the world with dragons as guardians, basically almost as somewhat of a nuclear deterrent between the nations because you don't want all the dragons to go to war. That's really long-winded, but that's how dragons work in Master's Tale.
Yeah.
So they're both symbols of order and a Chekhov's gun that's ready to go off.
Yeah, they are an establishment of order, but natural order. Even if that doesn't really fit in sometimes. If so it
Right.
seems.
Yeah,
And of course,
so
in Master's Tale lore, we recently had the huge world war, and dragons were involved in that one too. So unfortunately, much like most other nuclear deterrents, it only created more issues.
yeah, this is definitely something that can turn sour very quickly. Um, Dragons themselves. So we had the event, the Sundering, which gave rise to these dragons. There's another set of dragons from the New West that come about from the Sundering, and these are the Earthen Dragons. So the Earthen Dragons do not represent power in the same way. They're very wild as far as creatures go. I'm going to pull some of these up. They are divided into the elements of stone, earth, and metal. So we'll cover the metal one first because it is the most similar to the dragons that are on the main continent. So metal dragons are significantly smaller than other dragons. They are completely encased in their element, i.e. metal. And they're pretty nifty looking. So this is one of the metal dragons. This would be about the size of maybe like a Clydesdale without its tail, right? Like the tail would be longer than the Clydesdale itself. They are completely metal plated. They can fly through things like razor blades and just slice things to pieces like big flying knives type of deal. Very cool, very interesting dragon. I also designed them where you see that neck kind of comes out of a hollow portion. That neck can actually retract in and they can fly like bullets. So they are extremely fast. They're smaller dragons. They came about post Sundering, but many of the elemental dragons that existed considered them too small to formally be dragons. And so a lot of them were hunted as false dragons, and so they fled to the Western continent and have been there ever since. So they actually have the same origin as the light element dragons. Then you get to the big boys. So the biggest of the dragons are the formal earthen dragons. So we're going to pull the earth dragon real quick. Let's see here. And we had to do a lot of deliberating in making these. I mean, these are really, there was a lot of work that went into them.
I'll say this, though, from experience, the Earth Dragons are incredibly fun to fight and incredibly fun to send after players.
Yeah, Earth Dragons can burrow underground. They're much bigger than their other dragon counterparts. They're, of course, clay and armored plated. There's just a lot of trouble they give parties. A dragon that can come up from underground is a huge problem. And then breathing out attacks that can solidify on people to slow them down as you basically breathe out aerolized cement is just an awful breath weapon. it just kind of coats people and dries until they're statues. Which it's just such a weird and different take on dragons. I mean, it almost looks like a mammoth kind of or some other creature.
Yeah. And they're generally sleeping. They're not active all that much.
Right. No, and so they're definitely a fun, weird dragon to get into. And pull up this is actually my favorite dragon visually. Let's see. Is our stone dragon. So stone dragons, if earth dragons can move underground, stone dragons can bore through the earth, right? These things have giant spinning, almost like drill bits as they saw their way through stone. They have a breath weapon, which is a highly super concentrated, basically boulder that's fired at speed. So it's like a bullet that just destroys fortresses. These things are really cool in that you can actually fight on the back of them because they're so big. And they're actually pretty quick once they get moving, right? They fight more like a battleship than they do like a creature. And so you see one of these things and you know, hey, I'm standing on the back of a fortress wall. Maybe I move because this thing is about to collapse. So these dragons are pretty terrible for anything that's standing, which is why a lot of the plains areas in the New West are virtually uninhabited by larger structures because these things just indiscriminately mow through them.
Right. One interesting thing about these dragons is that because they're not on the mainland, they don't have the same business acumen as their brother species.
Sure.
In the same way as, well, I'm running a bank. I I know dwarves mostly handle the actual monetary methods of the bank, but dragons are the big bosses of the place. It's their money, it's their time, it's their fortress that they need to defend. If so, it's, hey, boss, dragons muscling in on your territory. Go take care of them.
Sure.
The dragon is going to do that. That's not going to be a bunch of dwarves, and are not going to be sent out to deal with that. Versus these guys are living a much more sedate life. They're living their best life being dragons and not really having to deal with all the bureaucracy.
Sure. And not that they don't interact with the other sentient races, they definitely do, but there's definitely not this connection of these are regal, powerful, almost, military chess pieces, right? This is more just like, hey, this thing exists. It's doing its thing. I mean, it has no reason to eat sentient races because it's so large, right? And a lot of these dragons, so much of their body is made of their natural element, right? Like their armor is stone or clay or metal, that they're a lot of what they eat is inorganic material that ends up forming into these carapace like defenses all over their body.
Mm.
So, looking at these dragons, one of the differences that we had was that dragons in D&D are they have alignments, right? So you have good dragons, you have bad dragons. I think it's the chromatic dragons are bad under Tiamat, and then the metallic dragons are good. Um, and we did not want that. We wanted dragons to not be amoral, but to be moral beings on their own, right? While
Yeah.
they did represent a kind of bulwark against chaos, right? Because we don't want great and terrible powers to rise up, like the demons again. And so these dragons exist to make sure the sentient races don't get stupid. They have their own agendas, their own thoughts, their own goals, etc. Um, that really make each dragon its own character, which I really like. I don't. There's something about having a dragon be predictable. Oh, it's this colored dragon, so it's evil. It's like some mild dragon racism. Just not that into it. It's not
Well,
a.